Good morning from Bethesda, Maryland. I hope everyone is well. And we're back. It's week 2 since we met last. It's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere, which sadly for our Southern Hemisphere cohort, it must be the beginning of winter. But I could tell you we have in the summer here in Washington, D.C. area, we have the 3 H's, hazy, hot, and humid. But we're going to talk about 3 other letters, LCE, today. And it's a big day for us, a big day because today we're considering the approval of an exposure draft. As you know, this standard or this project really emanated from our strategy where we really wanted to make sure that we were focused on the key public interest issues. And one of the issues is the continued divergence of standards for LCEs around the world and a growing demand as our standards became more complex, as we had greater demands for additional guidance for more complex and listed entities out there. So this was become a top strategic topic for us. And, there was a lot of, to some extent, doubts about our willingness and our ability to move rapidly on this project. The fact that we're here today, basically a year after we started this effort, it shows that we could act quickly. And with each iteration, I really believe that the draft has gotten better and better and better. So thank you for your proverbially kicking the tires on this draft standard. And indeed, we are following a new way of drafting standards right here, using a reference group, lots of outreach in the process, constantly iterating on the draft and bringing to you in rapid succession. So today, what we're asking you is, based upon what we know right now, and recognize this is a new way of standard setting, a new type of project, have we taken this draft standard so far that it really would benefit from public input? And as I said, based upon what we know, there's lots of things we admit that we don't quite know. And that's all the topics we have put in the EM where we ask for additional input. And one of the things that our due process is when we talk about exposure draft, and people have raised this, is assuming we got no comment, would you be happy with this being a final standard, except we're cited the things you don't know and you're seeking comment on? The fact is, we are going to get comment on this, and we are directly seeking comment on it. And this is a slightly new way of standard setting. So I hope you keep that in mind as we go through. I am fully confident that the task force, having read the latest iteration, has been really responsive to board member comments. I feel very comfortable with the direction we're in right now. Obviously, we'll benefit from the discussion today. But I think there's no time like the present to seek input and demonstrate our commitment to dealing with this top strategic and public interest issue for the IAASB. I would also, before I turn it over to Kai, I want to welcome Karen Stothers, who's now joining us for the PIOB. Michael was with us last week, but Karen, it's great to have us with you. It looks like you're ready to climb the mountains. I feel like we've climbed the mountain, and the Viking has led the way here, and we may have that image come back to us. I don't know. I'm hoping by the end, at the top of the peak, maybe at the end. So great to have you with us, Karen, and feel free to interject when you want.
Thanks very much, Tom. And I have connected with Michael Hafman, so I'm up to speed.
Yeah, it's great. So lots happened since we met last on this project. Lots of comments came in and lots of work by the task force and staff. And thank you for everyone for your comments, being so diligent, participating in the consultations. And I think we're getting to the point that we could get to the decision at hand. I'm going to pause here and ask if anyone wants to comment, or if not, I'll just turn it to Kai to take us through the latest draft. Okay, Kai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. As you said, it's an important time of this project, not only for the board, but also for all the practitioners that has been asking for this. And as you said, to help solve the public interest issues that are here. Also, thanks to the board for the comments that they've sent through, helping us through the process, and to the task force, and especially the staff with the work that's been done. I don't think you even can imagine the amount of work that's gone into the last weeks in this area. So if we go, I think of what we'll do now is just talk shortly through some of the changes that was made in the last version, and then go through some of the other areas where we've been asked questions and where we haven't done changes to the standard as such. And after that, we will open for comments on the different parts from you, if there is any comments that you would like to make before going to the vote. So Michelle, if you move to the next slide. The first change that was made in the document that is in the latest is some modifications clarifying the language around specifically A6 in the authority, trying to make it a bit more clear, the distinction on what can be modified and how that process would go. That's also then in A11 to the same point, to clarify more around modifications, how things are set up and what can be done by the jurisdictions. The other point is around going concern. Throughout the standard on various places, there has been some additions, and also some requirements may have moved around a bit from other parts of the standard. This is some of these changes is basically trying to align a bit more to some of the content that were in the ISAs, and to make them, or based on the comments received, that we're more aligned with the concepts there. Also, in the version that you see, we've now done the conforming amendments from ISA 315 to ISA 330, so that they should be requirements that we have in the ISA 330 should now be aligned with what we have in our standard and updated to the latest conforming amendments. Around testing of controls, this is an area where we continue to hear that on a lot of these LCE audits that auditors typically don't test controls. So we have gone in with a bare minimum of requirements on this area to address that. You could do testing of controls, but it's not a big area. So what we have done based on the comments received is add in some more requirements. So now that we're covering off at least the basic set of requirements there. So that should be hopefully then sufficient for the testing of controls in this area. I think same around accounting estimates. This is an area where we had gone in with trying to condense and compromise a bit, or not compromise, but to then have the requirements in related to LCE audits. I think based on the input from the board there, also we've added some more requirements so we're closer to the ISA 540. We're still at basic accounting estimates, so we don't address the complex situations, and that should be picked up through the authority section that you're scoped out, so it would not be necessarily to have them in. Around reporting, one thing we have done that you might have seen is that in part 8 we added references to the different reportings in part 9. There's also in part 9 we added some additional requirements based on input we got, and also added some footnotes on the wording that would go in the different situations. Throughout the document, in the previous version, we had deleted some text based on input from board members that thought it might not be necessary, or we've done some changing. After we did that change, on the previous version, we did get comments from some board members wanting the previous version to be put back in for different reasons, and for some of those, we've gone back to the original wording that we had in the previous round. And then also on the conforming amendments to the preface, we have, as you will see, we've addressed the comments that we received that it seemed like you had to use the standard. Now it's an alternative, so that's been added in. That's some of the changes that we have done. So if we then move on to the next slide. One of the other discussion points that we had over the last meetings has been around transition. If you come to a situation where you no longer can use the standard, how would you then address that situation, and would you move to the ISAs or not? This is an area we've discussed quite a lot in the task force as well, and I think on balance what we decided, if you need to transition out of this standard, it's really not an issue that should be dealt with within this standard, because this standard is what you need to do in order to perform an audit and report in accordance with the separate standard. So it's not really anything that should be dealt with within this standard. We have addressed some comments on this, especially in 1.3.4, where we earlier said you need to transition, and now we've explained a bit more what you need to do. I think in the explanatory memorandum, we will have a piece on this also around transition, explaining it a bit more. But I think, as I said, on balance, this is something that we felt should not be dealt with within the standard itself. The next one is around audit of components. We did get comments from some board members that we should explicitly state in the authority that even though that you might not be, or that you can't use the standard for a group audit, if you do a statutory audit of a component, for that audit you could use the standard if you were in accordance with the authority. We did try to create a requirement or have that in the authority. That's become quite lengthy and would be quite detailed. Also, if you look at the footnotes to ISO 600 trying to describe what was the boundaries of a 600, it become quite difficult to address. And I think this is something, again, that we will deal with more with, could deal with more in the supplement, and also in the explaining a bit more. As I said, we tried to address it, but on balance, we didn't find the wording that would be clear and helpful and not cause additional issues. Service organizations, we've also been asked to whether or not we should put in more requirements, especially how to address type 1 or type 2 reports from service organization auditors. The assumption we took going into this project is that, yes, there might be situations where you have service organizations on the LCEs, and we've added requirements to address some of that, but it would not be an extensive area, so that we have requirements how to deal with it, but we have not included all the details from 402 type 1, type 2 report. I think this is something we need to address in the EM and ask for specific input, whether or not our assumptions going in was correct or not, or whether we need to add more content to be in line with 402 and the including type 1, type 2 report. The next two bullets that are here, public interest characteristics and practitioners. I'll hand over to Willie so he can explain a bit further on those.
Thank you, Kai. Yes, so just on the public interest characteristics, you will remember that during the board sessions last week, we had a discussion about the paragraph in the authority that referred to that if an entity exhibits public interest characteristics is excluded. But what we've decided to do is, and that was processed, is we then said, but we have to link that to the design of the standard in terms of not dealing with complex matters or circumstances. And you'll remember that you saw a version where we brought in and said, we brought in complexity and accountability, but accountability clearly tripped up a lot of the board members. So we took that out, but we do continue to believe that it is relevant to link that paragraph A5 as the principle that we're applying, that entities that have public interest characteristics could embody a level of complexity in fact or appearance. And it is important to just note that the word could there has been used very deliberately. It could embody a level of complexity and in fact or appearance. So it's not to say that any entity with public interest characteristics will, but what we wanted to be clear, that is the overarching principle. And then that follows then with the prohibitions, where we then say, well, these are the ones that we think would normally embody that complexity, and that's why they've been excluded: listed entity and the ones under the C, bullet point C, in that section. The problem is if we don't have that paragraph 5 and we just immediately start reading paragraph 6. That says paragraph A7 sets out the classes of entity for which the use of the standard is specifically prohibited. The logical question you will get is why. And the A5 is that overarching why these are excluded. It's when they have public interest characteristics that embody a level of complexity in fact or appearance. It seemed that if most board members were satisfied with that. So that's on the public interest characteristics. So like I said, the point that really was problematic was when we brought in the concept of accountability, but we've taken that out. Then we did also receive comments around the definitions, around the definition of practitioner and whether we really need that definition. So quite rightly, the only place where practitioner was actually used in the standard was in the heading in the authority, where we had the heading firms and practitioners, which we've now changed to firms and auditors. The only reason why we kept in practitioner in the definition is because there is an interplay between a number of the definitions, definitions and descriptions in the appendix or in the glossary of terms, and that is between relevant ethical requirements, public accountant in public practice, and practitioner. And that was the reason why we kept in practitioner. The term practitioner also pops up in two of our other descriptions, in one of our other definitions, the definition of firm, and one of our other described terms, namely significance. And that's why we kept practitioner there. I think it's such a part of the lexicon of the IAASB and the ethics code, and that's really why we left practitioner in there as a definition. Thank you, Kai.
Thank you for that, Willie. I think the last bullet on this slide, other changes, and we did receive also some other specific requests for requirements from the ISAs to be pulled back into this separate standard. I think on balance, going through them, one thing we need to keep in the back of our head as well is that throughout this process, we're trying to include the requirements that would relate to the nature and circumstances of an ISA for LCE, and some of the specifics from the ISAs have not been brought in, or as we've explained in the project proposal and throughout as well, that some requirements may not be addressed through this standard because it may not be relevant for that specific engagement as such. What we tried to do is then to pick out the core requirements instead, and the ones that are necessary to obtain reasonable assurance. I think also one other thing worth to mention is that, as we said throughout, we will also consider what our role should be in relation to the rollout of the standard, and especially also how we could work with others. Maybe, for example, IFAC to update or develop something similar to the IFAC SMP guide. That could also be quite helpful for practitioners trying to implement and use the standard as such. I think that was most of the areas that I wanted to talk through of the changes that has been done. Luckily, there weren't really that many changes in the last rounds. So if you go to the next slide, I think then the intention now is that we will start asking for your views on the final standard, agenda item 2A and the supplement to the agenda. If you go to the next slide, then we have the structure of how we can go through that. If we start with the preface and the authority section. So Tom, if I hand back to you so we can get any final views from the board on the preface and authority section.
Okay, on the preface and the authority section. So if you're looking at our draft that begins on page 4. So.
Thanks. I'm not quite sure whether this is the right place, but I just wanted to pick up on something that Kai said in the earlier slides. I mean, firstly, Kai, thank you to you and the team for the incredible amount of work. It's really outstanding, and I know that you've put so much in, and I appreciate the responses we've had. The question I had was where you talked about transition out of this standard, and you said that you don't think it's the place of this standard to deal with it, and I agree with that. But I do think it's important that we pick up somewhere where and how it's going to be dealt with, because it will be quite a significant practical issue that's going to come up in a lot of places. Thanks.
I assume, Kai, that the explanatory memorandum would explain quite a bit about our current thinking on where, how, when we plan to pick up transition issues. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's something that we will pick up and explain a bit more in the explanatory memorandum.
Okay. Sue, does that satisfy you? Meet your expectations?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for allowing us to put that on the record. Imran.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Kai, and good afternoon, board members from a very cold second day of winter in Johannesburg. Thank you for all of the feedback, and of course, thank you for the time that we spent both via email and in person on Sunday talking through these issues, and acknowledge how you have dealt with them. I'd like to offer a reflection on the preface and authority section, particularly 3 things that came up on your previous slide, Kai Morton. The first is, like Sue, I too think that the topic of transition deserves the more attention than it currently is addressed in 1.3.4. It's almost as if it says you'll have to deal with transition, but not providing any insights or indication of what those risks are. I accept that this is as far as the board is prepared to go on it. I hope that the explanatory memorandum or the accompanying materials is able to provide the color that we're looking for. On the order of components, I understood what the task force was up against. The footnote to the group prohibition was already 6 lines long. And if we wrote any more, the footnote would have been longer than the text on the page. It's unfortunate because, as I shared with you, 4 of the 4 practitioners that I referenced on the draft all asked the same question. How does this prohibition extend to the components for the work done in the subsidiaries? Needless to say, we went to hear that on exposure. It would have been helpful if we didn't go out with that gap. But I like what you're saying, that you're going to try to deal with that in the explanatory memorandum. One would hope that it would eventually find its way into the standard. And the last is the explanation that you've offered in respect of paragraph A5 and the PI characteristics. On an earlier version, I recall that Lynn and I described why using the intrinsic level of accountability was a problematic construct. And I appreciate that you have tried to work your way through A5. I heard carefully, as Willie explained, that A5 hinged on the use of the word could. I must say that, Willie, as often as I read this, and I had a detailed exchange with staff on this over the last 2 days, I missed that. And I came to the conclusion before, and I come to the conclusion again now, that a level of complexity in fact or appearance allows it to be interpreted that all such entities will be prohibited, because every entity is going to have a level of complexity, whether low, medium, or high, whether in fact or in appearance. And I know this is not where the thinking of the board is. The board has no intention to prohibit its use for all entities with public interest characteristics. I maintain that that's what A5 means to me on the plain reading of the English, after having spent a few goes at this. I appreciate we've been through a number of versions. I worry whether we actually got this thing right in respect of the prohibition. The prohibition seems to read to me in a universal way in A5, and then we go on in A6 and A7 to unpack it. So I really wanted to raise that on the public record. Of course, if that's what it is, if it prohibits all pies, that's closer to where I stand in my views about authority, but that's not where the board is. But I wanted to point that out to you, that in fact, that's how I read it. And it made me happy, but it should make other members of the board sad. To wrap up on this area of preference and authority is the area where I previously raised the areas that I considered to be fatal, despite the efforts of the task force, which I acknowledge we've not been able to close the gap, particularly on what I described as the significant areas of judgment. By not closing the gap, I am concerned about the consistency of application. I'm concerned about the level of professional judgment, the regulatory concerns that this gives rise to, and ultimately the impact on quality and the increase in the expectation gap that could arise in this area. But I say so understanding that the task force has had to be responsive to all 18 board members, to the reference group and everyone else. And this is as far as you're able to go with this draft pre-exposure. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran, for sharing your views. I have a question. Would it be worth a clarification on A5 right now, Lily, I guess, on Imran's point, because he's raising a question of interpretation, or do you want to cover that later?
I think, Tom, let's take a few more comments and then you can maybe...
Okay, let's make sure we gather that back, respond to it. Isabel?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. My comment is not specifically on preface and authority, but as I will speak only once, I'm doing it right now, just to thank the task force for the amazing work that has been done. Thanks the task force for having taken into account the comments I expressed last week, and also all the debates we had last week. Really satisfied with the outcome and the current status of the draft. So I have no more comments to make. On the topic of transitioning out of the standard to the full ISAs, maybe I missed something, but I believe that if we have to transition out of the standard, it's because the entity has become more complex. It's not anymore a less complex entity. So if it's more complex, then more work needs to be done and more needs to be documented. So I find it quite clear and almost obvious that the auditor will know what to do because of the additional complexity that has changed the landscape. So I'm not perceiving, as some, the need for additional guidance for that, but again, a personal view on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Ada? Ada, are you in your office now? I'm missing your home office background.
No, I'm not. I'm in a hotel room, Tom. Thank you, Tom, and Kai, and the task force and the staff. fantastic job done in turning the documents around a couple of times before we got to this point. I think I cannot express how much appreciation I have for the effort that you've put in. This will come not as a surprise, but I still struggle with the judgmental nature and the criteria, the qualitative criteria that have been included in the requirements. I've also gone through the supplement. I still think there's a significant amount of judgment involved in determining whether an entity could be in or out. I'm troubled by auditors potentially trying to reach as far as possible, so just under the complex situation. I personally don't think we had that in mind. So I'm a little bit or not a little bit, I am with Imran on this, that I struggle to see that this can be applied consistently in practice. And it could also lead to a bit of a race to the bottom where entities could shop around and to find an auditor or firm that wants to apply this standard to their audit. I am also with Imran and cognizant of the comments and a further clarification on the transition. I'm also in agreement actually with Isabel that it could be quite clear, but maybe we could make it very explicit with a short statement that if the entity doesn't fit this standard anymore, the full ISAs apply, and it more or less means you start over with leveraging the work potentially that you've done before. And that would be okay with me. So those are my two comments in respect of the preface of an authority. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Kai?
Tom, thank you, and good afternoon from Europe and Germany. Kai, thanks very much for the great work, for your task force, the staff, and personally you. Very much appreciate that you have taken into account most of my comments, which I have presented to you. Thanks very much for this. I have two little comments referring to the preface and authority. The first one is to paragraph P7. There I would also like to thank you for seeking to align paragraph P7 with paragraph A5 of ISA 200. However, in line with paragraph A5 of ISA 200, the words may also encompass in the first sentence of P7 should be, in my view, be deleted, since the issue is whether the framework consists of standard or law, not whether it consists standards and also law. The second sentence deals with a situation where the framework encompasses both standards and law. That's my first comment, and give me a second for the second comment. It refers to paragraph A14. I'm concerned about the elimination of what was formerly paragraph A14, since it is not, in my view, in the public interest for auditors to use the LCE standard when there is doubt as to its applicability. That's my view. Thanks, Tom. I give back to you.
Thank you. Eric?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks very much to the task force. Like others, I think this has been an amazing ride to get to where we are. Very responsive to most of our comments, and particularly want to thank the task force for the work on paragraph A6. I think it's much clearer now how the legislative authority or standard setting body can make amendments to the prohibitions. So I very much appreciate that. As has been mentioned by others, still concerned around the transition and the situations where the the auditor encounters an item of complexity during the course of the audit. To me, it's not as clear-cut as others seem to feel about what the auditor does in that situation, and I would really have appreciated more help to the practitioner in that situation. And I think that also overlaps with the judgment issue that others have been mentioning about the criteria for being in and out of the standard. But I also appreciate, Tom, your opening remarks around this type of exposure draft is maybe different from ones that we've done in the past, where really we've not tried to resolve every single issue in this standard. We have taken it to a point where it's ready for public comment, and some of these unresolved issues can then be finalized. So I appreciate the direction that you're suggesting the board go in that respect. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Josephine.
Afternoon, everybody. First of all, yes, I mean, I just want to echo everyone else's comments so far about the absolutely phenomenal amount of work that's gone on to get this document to this state. I mean, the turnarounds have been incredibly impressive and timely and really helpful, particularly across all these different time zones. We were still able to look at turnaround documents that not at 2 o'clock in the morning, which is what we feared, given the amount of work that we knew you had to do. So huge thanks to Bev, the team and the task force for this work. I just wanted to say that similar to Imran, Ado, and to some extent Eric, I do also still struggle with the amount of judgment involved, but also I agree with others as well that we are at that stage where it's now time to solicit other people's views on this matter. And so we have to be fairly precise with our questioning in the explanatory memorandum on this. But yes, that professional judgment piece does bring in too much scope of entities in my view still. So do need to pin that down and make sure, as I say, we raise this in the EM. But just really on this, I wanted to say thank you. Thanks.
Right, and Josephine, I think to Eric, like on those points in the EM, I would suggest that we could give some texture of some of the concerns that board members have expressed. But from what I'm reading from your comments is that you're saying this shouldn't be by itself a blocker for getting feedback from the wider public, which would occur if we voted against the ED on the basis of it.
Certainly from my perspective, Tom. That's
I'm not trying to put words in other people's mouths. We haven't heard from everyone, and this has been a critical topic. So if you haven't spoken and you're not on the task force, I assume that you're in broad support of getting feedback on the way that it's drafted, obviously subject to the couple of points that have been raised today. Is that a fair assessment? Not to say that you fully embrace all the language, but based upon where we are today, you're broadly comfortable with getting public input on preface and the authority. Is that a fair assessment? Anyone who hasn't spoken feel differently? Okay, so Kai and Billy, you did have, there was that one point of clarification that I think Imran raised, and then that sort of requires some comments. And Kai raised a couple of points regarding some drafting that also merits discussion on this topic. Imran and Edo, regardless of your vote, your concerns are noted for the record and certainly will be subject to some discussion in the explanatory memorandum as well. Okay.
Thank you, and especially on the last part around the judgment and the qualitative characteristics, and if there will be commercial considerations in using the standard or not. We did, as you might have seen in part 4.4 or requirement 4.4.1, we did refer back to the ISQM, where it says that paragraph 30 that sets out the firm's responsibilities for establishing quality objectives for acceptance of engagements, and including relating to financial operating priorities that should not involve. So we did include that to try to address some of those concerns, but that would then be dealing with it a similar way as we do in the ISAs today. Kai-Uwe, you mentioned on P7. You also mentioned in your comment that although we are in line with what the ISA says, you felt that some of the words from what we have there should be taken out. We did do that consideration and felt that we should stay consistent with what we have in the ISA. You questioned the deletion of A14, the familiar when you're in doubt, you're out. It's not removed. It was in 2 places. It's also at the end of A9. So it's still at the end of A9 as it's been, but it's been taken out of A14. So it's not been removed. It's just that we had it in twice, and it felt it was a bit. It was not intentional to have it twice either. So that's the reason for taking that one out. On Imran's point of A5, I think as Willie explained, A5 is really there to set up the construct of what we have in A7. Willie, do you want to come in and explain a bit more around that?
Yeah, thank you, Kai. And you're quite right. The function of A5 is not to be prescriptive. The prescription comes in A7 and A6 and A7. It's setting up the context. But Imran, we obviously did give this some consideration when your comments came in yesterday. So the best we thought, and I don't know if this will help you. I explained earlier the use of the word "could" implies that it is not all entities with public interest characteristics. But we did think one thing that we could do is, if that sentence reads, entities that have public interest characteristics could embody a level of complexity and in fact or appearance, and, if so, are specifically prohibited from using the draft ISA for LCE, and then following A6 and A7 that describes the prohibitions that we attach to A5 for purposes of this standard. So that's something we came up with yesterday evening. I don't know if that will help you. You know, the risk with these things is always we make a change, and we then trip up other board members. But we thought we would offer that as a suggestion.
Any reaction? Josephine?
Sorry, Tom, I suppose I ought to let Imran go first.
Imran was nodding that he did not have a reaction.
Well, from my perspective, that actually adds more judgment into the question, not to the question, but, well, it is a question because somebody is asking, does this entity have a public interest characteristic? And I think it's more of a statement of fact, the way it's written. But if we say, if so, then it's adding another level of judgment from my perspective, just off the cuff here now. So I'd be slightly concerned about adding that in personally.
You know, I tend to agree. I think it's sort of extra wording. Imran, now you have your hands raised.
Thank you. Appreciate the effort, but I don't think that will address the underlying concern. Thanks.
Okay. Kai-Uwe.
Thanks, Tom. I support the issuance of the standards to obtain feedback if I disagree with some matters in the standard. And let me come back to my comment referring to paragraph P7. The wording, Kai, is not consistent with what is in ISA 200A5. The words I suggest removing would make it consistent. This is my feedback to what Kai has meant. Thanks.
Okay, we'll come back to that point. We're still on A5 right now. Edo and Lynn, is your point on A5? Okay, Edo.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I was wondering, given the explanation that really said that this is not an outright requirement, whether this sentence could be put in EEM rather than in an A5, rather than in a paragraph.
So
Just a
your
suggested solution.
would be to blue box this up top, effectively. Okay, let's get a Lynn.
Good evening, everybody. I was one of the people with Imran that had a problem with this paragraph, and it was particularly the word accountability that my concern revolved around. I think the current drafting is better, but I wasn't particularly struck by the extra words that Billy read out, that they clarified it and helped me any. So I would be in favour of leaving A5 as it's currently drafted. It may not be perfect, but I think it is adequate to get feedback on. Thank you.
Let me say, based upon what I heard before, I think Lynn's attitude sort of was the attitude that I saw the board was taking, that the if so didn't add much, in fact may confuse matters. So who is happy enough to leave it as is for the purposes of consultation? By show of hands. Okay, clear majority there. And for those who aren't happy, for those who've already voiced their concerns about the whole section, we note that anyway. I think we leave it as is. Your hand's still up. Is that excellent? Down? Okay, great. We're just going to leave it as is. We note that we may find a better articulation between now and full issuance of the standard, and we should work on that. Okay, Kai, the other Kai raised a suggestion on another point. Do you want to respond to that?
I'm trying to find my notes of on this point, especially Bev. Do you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, maybe if they can just tell us what needs to change in that paragraph, that'll be helpful for everyone to understand, because I've just had a look at A5, so I just need to know what the exact change needs to be.
On A5? No.
P7.
No.
Sorry, P7.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. A5.
A5, I thought we just dealt with.
Ready.
P7. A5 is staying. P7. Kai, do you want to suggest language again?
I can do, Tom. Thanks. My suggestion is for P7, if I can read both sentences, the applicable financial reporting framework often encompasses financial reporting standards established by an authorized or recognized standing setting organization, or may also encompass legislative or regulatory requirements. In some cases, the financial reporting framework may encompass both financial reporting standards established by an authorized or recognized standard setting organization and legislative or regulatory requirements. This is my suggestion for the wording in P7.
I think that's what I read, is that maybe you're looking at an older version, but the one that was issued, updated for 23 June draft ISA for LCE full final, made that suggestion.
Okay.
So I think we're good on that. And I don't see anyone objected. So if that's okay, we have been very responsive to your comment.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. So, okay. Kai, back to you. I think we've gotten through the comments. Any other comments on this, the preface and authority sections?
No, I think as multiples had pointed out, transitioning, we will have some more on in the explanatory memorandum and also around the components, as Imran pointed out, and trying to be more clear on how that would affect the applicable or the use of the standard as such.
Billy has his hand up.
Yeah, Tom, I just want to come in. I think we indicated when we circulated the straw man for the outline for the EM that we will address transition there. Remember, board members are going to get the explanatory memorandum to provide. Oh, sorry. I see now I switched off my video. Sorry, I apologize for that. So board members will get the EM to comment on. I just want to calibrate expectations there. Remember, we cannot in the EM give a full guide on transition. What we will put in the EM is our thinking and our approach to transition, and we will ask questions about it so we can get from the stakeholders the input to see to what extent is that an issue and what type of guidance will they be looking for. So just to temper that when you get the EM, don't expect to see a full guide on transition in the EM, but we will address the issue. We will give our initial thinking and approach to that, but we will ask stakeholders for input to see to what level does that does that rise as a concern for them, and what would they expect from the IAASB?
Yeah, I think Eric, though, makes a good point. It's consistent with my thinking. It means during this period of consultation, as we're hearing stuff, our thinking, well, could evolve, and we could be developing whatever approach we think is appropriate to be responsive, that the work could continue during this 180-day cycle, if that's where we conclude. And I think that was a little bit of Eric's point too, is not only should you have it in the EM, but we can continue to work on a couple of these outstanding topics over time. Is that a fair characterization of your viewpoint, Eric?
Yes, I think so, because you are going to receive commentary on that anyway. So I think, why stop and wait? You can keep thinking about it. I agree.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's consistent with my thinking on it. Okay, thank you, Veli, for the clarification and setting our expectations right. Kai, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. I think then we'll turn on to getting comments on parts 1 through 3. So quick turn back to you, Tom, to get the board's final input on parts 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, parts 1 to 3. If you're looking at the latest draft, that begins on page 9. No, that goes late. Sorry. Later than 9. That was the authority. Page 13. Okay, any comments? Okay, I see no hands. That means general support for what the task force and staff have done on parts 1 to 3. Should we go to parts 4 and 5?
Yes, we can. So comments on part 4 and 5.
I see no hands. I'm not precluding debate, but I assume I could make the same assumption for the record and support for what the task force have done on parts 4 and 5. Okay, I'm just gonna go for it. Part 6. Josephine.
I'm ever so sorry to break this fantastic flow. And again, I must say, I know the Tussles have been so incredibly responsive to my comments. I just have a question on 6.5.1 and on the deletion in B. So I think it's just so I can understand. I can see why the reference to including estimation uncertainty for accounting estimates, etc., has been deleted, because that's obviously covered in 6.5.2. But I feel that we've now actually, unless I can't see it for want of looking, I can't see now where the auditor takes into account the degree of inherent risk factors for other assertions. And so I know that we also require the auditor to think about these inherent risk factors, and we talk about it in the EEM, but we're missing the requirements. So essentially now I read it that we only have to worry about that for accounting estimates and nothing else. So I'm just wondering whether perhaps too much was deleted there, and in fact we need to still have that first piece. In doing so, take into account the degree to which inherent risk factors affect the susceptibility to relevant assertions. I think that still needs to stay in there, but it might be that, you know, it's the wood for the trees and I can't see where the requirement is now. I did look, but I couldn't see it. So thank you.
Kai or Bev, could you respond to Josephine?
I'm looking to see.
Or maybe what drove the deletion? Maybe
somebody would have raised it. I need to find the comment. It does, in just reading it like Josephine read it, it does look like we've taken out too much because you don't have that requirement now. But
I'm guessing Kai may have raised the initial comment, so he raised his hand here. So Kai.
Thanks, Tom. I have a brief comment to paragraph 6.2.5.
Could I ask you to hold off on that for a second?
No,
let's see. I thought you were coming on 6.5.1.
Okay.
We need to finish this topic off first. So
it's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you. 651. So would one possibility is reinserting? Does anyone remember requested the deletion of this?
Yeah, I think we have taken out too much because we've separated the accounting estimate into 6.5.2, but I think to Josephine's point, then we've taken everything else out as well. So I think we do need to put that back and only take out the including estimation uncertainty in 6.5.1b.
So for the record, what you're suggesting is the second sentence should say, in doing so, the auditor shall take into account the degree to which inherent risk factors affect the susceptibility of the relevant assertions to misstatement.
Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
I'll repeat it one more time. In doing so, the auditor shall take into account the degree to which inherent risk factors affect the susceptibility of the relevant assertions to misstatement. This would be a reinsertion minus the words and the commas, including estimation uncertainty for the entity's accounting estimates. That's the proposal. Everyone content with that? Any unintended consequences associated with doing that? I don't see. Bev, you're comfortable. Billy, from a technical perspective, you're comfortable with that?
Yeah, Tom, I also just, as you were reading out that wording, I just went back to 315 revised 2019 as well, and that will then be consistent with what we have in 315 2019.
Okay, we'll reinsert that second sentence minus the including estimation of certainty for the entity's accounting estimates in the effective ballot draft. Okay, now Kai, I didn't mean to stop you from coming in. I just wanted to make sure we got clearance on that. Kai, you had 6.2 point something.
Yeah, first, Tom, thanks very much. I have had the same comment like Josephine for 6.51, but okay. I have additional comment for 6.2.5. Let me go back.
The paragraph, the auditor shall evaluate whether.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I have it. For me, it's unclear to me why the requirement from paragraph 16 of ISA 315 revised in relation to the auditor evaluating whether information obtained from previous audits that the auditor intends to use remains relevant and reliable has been removed. In my view, the requirement is also relevant for audits of LCEs. That's my point. Thanks.
Your reaction to that?
It's in part 5. I'm just trying to find it.
6255.
Yeah.
625.
Here it's in 5.2.4. So we didn't need it in both places. If you prefer it in 6, we can keep it there and then take it out of 5, but it's the same.
Okay, so the reference is to 5.2.4. I assume people are content with that treatment. Kai, haven't seen that it's at 5.2.4. Are you reasonably assured that this is not a fatal flaw for you?
No, it's not a fatal flaw, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. I suggest, based upon board heads nodding, that we keep it as is and note that it would have been an issue if not in 5.2.4. Is that a fair assessment? Okay. Eric?
Thanks, Tom. I'm bringing this point up. I think it appears in a number of places in the standard. In the ISAs, when we talk about the auditor gaining an understanding of something, we talk about using the words, the auditor shall obtain an understanding. And that is, the history of that, as I understand it, is because the auditor cannot really have 100% understanding of everything that they're required to. And so when you look at 6.3.1, for example, it says the auditor shall understand the industry and other external factors. And in the ISAs, that would be written as the auditor shall obtain an understanding of. And you know, the way it's written now, it's actually more rigorous than the ISAs because it implies that the auditor has to have a complete understanding of the entity and other external factors. So, you know, I've discussed this with Kai and Bev in the past, and I believe there's a view that the two terms are the same, but I really do believe that it would be better to be consistent with the ISAs and use obtain an understanding in these situations, just to be consistent and also to avoid the auditor being second guessed at a later date about the level of that understanding that may have been obtained as part of the requirements.
Any reaction to Eric?
Thank you, Tom. This is one of the earlier changes that we did do when doing this separate standard. And I think we've been consistent on it throughout. I think it also, I don't think it's not intended to change the meaning. I think that this is something we can obtain views on. I think if on the ED people will not understand the difference, then we will get feedback on it. But we have discussed it in a task force, and this is what we think should be in. I think it will drive you to the same result. That's at least our view.
Okay, are we happy with our current position for the moment? I think so. Oh, Eric, noting your point. Okay, any other comments on part 6? Okay. parts 7 and 8. You know.
Thank you, Tom. No detailed comments, and I've said this before. I think the scope for certain service organizations, particularly the development around soft or accounting packages that LCEs will use in a software as a service environment, I think that may be more applicable to an LCE than maybe the where we're currently sitting. But I, of course, appreciate that a specific question around this will be included in the EM, and that is fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on 7 and 8? Josephine.
I was on mute, apologies. Again, I think this is a wood for the trees. I really did try and find this, but I couldn't. So I just want to check on the 7.5.2 that was deleted. There's no, I don't think there's any actual requirement for the auditor to do anything with the misstatements now, other than to determine, first of all, if they're indicative of fraud, or how many you have and what you need to do, and from that point on. But there doesn't seem to be a requirement to actually ask management to correct them. Now, I understand that part 8.2.1, implicitly, if the auditor's evaluating if management has or hasn't corrected misstatements, then there has to be, therefore, an action that the auditor corrects them. But we don't normally write our standards in that way. So I just want to check with the task force if that request to correct all misstatements is somewhere else and I can't see it, and apologies if that's the case, or if there's a reason why we don't think it's necessary. And it is just a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai, or Bev, Philly, would you like to respond to Josephine?
The communication part, at least that's in 8.8.1. So we picked up the communication part of it specifically there.
I think the part we don't have is that we ask them to correct it.
Yep.
So we'll need to add something for that.
Okay, thank you.
Do we?
I agree, Tom. I think we inadvertently deleted that one. Josephine is quite right; it has to be there.
So, just for the record, since the document now has 7.5.2 deleted, is the idea to reinsert 7.5.2?
Yeah, we can, but without the communicate, because we have that in a different place. So the auditor shall request management to correct all misstatements accumulated during the audit.
Okay, does everyone understand what we're adding? Just the reinsert minus the word shall communicate and. Okay, people are supportive of that reinsertion minus the communication aspect. Okay. Record notes full support for that. Any other questions on 7 and 8? So Diane, your hand was up and then down. Was that your suggestion as well?
Yes, exactly. That was a point that actually was added back in because it was not, didn't come over from the ISAs. And so I'm happy with the proposed path forward. Thank you.
Great. I just want to make sure I didn't lose you. Okay, that's 7 and 8. So part 9's a little new compared to where, I don't know, Kai, whether you want to give any opening introduction on part 9, or we could go to it too.
No, I think we did address some of the items there up front. And I think on this area, as you saw, you got the draft, I think it was on Saturday, together with video explaining how our thinking behind it. you see that we're tackling these somewhat different than what we're doing in the ISAs in an innovative way, and I think we received quite good feedback from the board on that. So I don't have anything specific to bring up on this, Tom. So I think we can go back to you for comments on part 9.
Thank you. I personally found it as an elegant solution to a challenging problem, at least one that merited consideration. Any other comments on part 9? Sachika.
Thank you, Tom. And because this is my first time to talk, first of all, thank you very much, Kai and your team, for your very hard work. I even cannot imagine how hard it might be. So thank you so much. I have 2 comments on part 2, and they are not comments, but actually are sort of questions. And the first one is about 941 with regard to the specific format and content of the auditor's report. And I support the task force's decision to add the specific format and content of the auditor's report into the standard, because I think this is responsive to the board discussion last week. And also I think it now became very clear and easier to understand why it's needed to be included in the auditor's report. So I think it's a very elegant solution. But the one question that came to me was that by specifying the format and content, it seems to me that auditor's report for an audit of the LCE cannot add any wording beyond this format unless it is required by law or regulation. For example, it seems to suggest that the auditor cannot add the descriptions of key audit matters in the auditor's report. I agree that ISA for LC should be standalone standard, and therefore I agree it should not refer to ISA 701. But I just would like to confirm whether it is the intention to prohibit adding something even though they are not contradict with the requirements. And my next sort of question is around 961, and with regard to a special purpose framework. Para 961 small b was deleted, and also in the glossary of terms, the definition of special purpose framework was deleted. So my question is, do this deletion mean that auditor cannot use ISA for LC if the LC's financial statement is in accordance with the special purpose framework? And as I previously commented, perhaps in March, I think it is possible that very small entities prepare their financial statements in accordance with special purpose framework, because the definition of special purpose framework is a financial reporting framework that designed to meet the financial information needs of specific users. So the special purpose framework suits to the circumstances of the LCEs in some circumstances, because they do not need to think about a wide range of users. But I am okay if the task force's proposal is, let's narrow the scope of this standard only to either 700 series right now, and then we'll consider how to deal with either 800 series based on comments we will receive to the exposure draft, including whether to include 800 series in the standard. So I would just like to know what the task force's proposal is with regard to special purpose framework and more broadly, ISA 800 series. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sachika. This is something that the task force has discussed quite a bit, and I think we discussed in a previous board session. But for the sake of clarity and responsiveness to your question, I think that Kai or Billy or Brett could jump in here.
I can jump in there. I think in a way, on your second question, Sachiko, you had the solution there already. We narrowed the scope not to include special purpose frameworks, and that it's something that we will address in the EM and ask for specific use, whether or not this separate standard also should include that. So the question you also answered, that was good. So that's in line with our thinking. So we're in line there. On the specific format, as you said in 9.4.1, you can always add, but you cannot take out the text or modify the text. So you need to have the text that are in the specified format, but you can add additional stuff in.
Thank you, Kai. Sachiko, is that responsive to your point?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Eric.
Thanks, Tom. And just following on from Kai's statement there about 9.4.1, the wording in that paragraph says only if all significant elements of the specified format and content are included, and we were just a bit confused as to what the phrase significant elements means. What I heard Kai just say was that you had to keep the specified format and content, but you could add to it. But that isn't the way the wording is expressed in that paragraph. So I just wondered if we needed to delete the word significant elements from that paragraph. My second comment is down in, it's on page 90 and it's in table B, and we're talking about a qualified opinion where it's because the auditor's not been able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And in that case, the wording of the modification is slightly different from when it's a qualification because of a material misstatement. And I just think the practitioner it's not clear to the practitioner what the form of that wording needs or how that wording differs between the two situations. So we were just suggesting that perhaps there could be a footnote added in the box to explain when the different wording is used as between effects or possible effects of the matters described in the basis for qualified opinion section. Because right now there's nothing that helps the practitioner figure that out. And those are my two comments. Thank you.
Okay. I think unless Kai, your comments are directly related to what Eric raised, I'd want to I figure let's deal with these two comments and then maybe the one part of Sachiko's, which I think was on 9.4.1. I don't know who from the team wants to deal with this, whether it's Kai or Brett, who's had such a big hand in getting this section done as well. I see Brett's hand is up. But Kai, either you or Brett could handle it.
I think we can let Brett handle this. As you've seen from the video, he's mastered the reporting sections in the standard now.
Okay, thanks for that, Kai. So maybe just a couple of points here. So we have spent a lot of time trying to articulate this section right, and we're trying to balance here both the need to make sure that we've got all the requirements that we need to get to a similar answer under an ISA for LCEs as you would under the full ISAs, but also respecting the fact that we're trying not to replicate what would otherwise be, perhaps 100 pages of reporting requirements. So some compromises need to be made in that process. And we've tried to be very strategic and disciplined about where we've made those. So in the case of 9.4.1, that sentence is quite crucial. It is essentially cutting out the need to repeat about 2 pages of requirements. And the requirements are quite lengthy. It's in 700 paragraph 50 if you're interested, but there's a long description of all the things that need to be in a report in order for that report to be in accordance with the ISAs, even if law or regulation specifies a particular format. So what we're trying to do is find a shorthand way to do that. Now, in reality, our expectation is that auditors of LCEs are really, the thing that they're most desperate for is a template report. And we don't think they're actually going to do an awful lot of modifications to that template report. So that's why we felt quite comfortable with this quite draconian system of mandating basically the whole report except for a couple of sections. In the case of where there's a departure needed for law or regulation, it is a slightly different problem because a national standard setter, of course, can quite happily come in and rewrite this report to make it fit with their common law or regulation in their jurisdiction. So this requirement is essentially directed, I think, more at the national standard setters than it is at the practitioners, albeit that because of the way our standards are worded, the prohibition is at the auditor level. So if you think of it from that perspective, we can't, if we remove the phrase significant elements, then we're essentially binding up the hands of those national standard setters because they would have no ability to change anything except for, I guess, individual words in individual sentences. And that might be fine in some cases, but I wouldn't want to presume to know how global standard setters are all going to approach this. So we did try to give ourselves, or sorry, to give the national standard setters a little bit more flexibility. Let me just leave that one there, and I'm happy to come back to it if we need to. I do think this is an area where the reporting supplement will be important because in the reporting supplement, we can flesh out in a little bit of detail what those significant elements would likely be, keeping in mind that that's obviously non-authoritative material and not in the standard, but we do feel like that will be an adequate solution to the problem posed. In respect of, Eric, your question about the effects and possible effects, we did study this one in quite a bit of detail again. And we did sort of go back and forwards on, like, it's a fairly, like we can just add a footnote, but we're a bit conscious that we'd add a lot of footnotes for these kinds of things. And this felt like an example of something where the reporting supplement can probably do a better job of it. Because in the reporting supplement, we can have illustrative examples of different types of modified reports. And in there, we can make clear what that is. To add it in here requires a certain amount of extra words, and individually, none of those things are terribly important. But when you take them in totality, you start to end up with a very heavy section that starts to have a lot of footnotes, and the footnotes are getting quite long and quite burdensome. So we did, after discussing it, decide that the best answer was to leave that for the reporting supplement. And I guess part of that was that we didn't feel like there was, that the risk of practitioners getting to the wrong answer in terms of whether they say effects or possible effects was not particularly high. And so the reporting supplement was an adequate response to that. Thanks.
Okay, any reaction to Brett? Is it, Edo, your hand up in reaction to Brett?
Yes.
Okay, please come in.
Thanks, Brett. That's very helpful. I was just wondering because I agree with Eric on his point, whether we could bracket the word possible and explain in what case possible is used. Because I don't think that will add any length to either the footnote or the standard.
Okay, could you go back, make for the record the paragraph you're referring to?
Yeah, so that's in 9.5.1.c, the qualified opinion, because at the moment it says except for, and then within brackets effects or possible effects. And I was wondering if we could make that read except for the, within brackets, possible effects of the matters, and then explain in what instance possible is used. And that's only in the instance of insufficient appropriate audit evidence. Just
any reaction by the team to that?
Yeah, just for my own behalf, I'd say, yes, we can do it. It does become that question for the board on the totality of how many footnotes you want. Kai, I don't know if you have a view on this one, whether there's a, like it's a balancing act, and I fully appreciate you're trying to balance it across the whole length of the standard.
Yeah, I think as you explained, Brett, our intention was this trying not to complicate it too much either. So it is something that we, as you said, will explain more in the supplemental guide. But as I say, there may be multiple areas where you could have additional footnotes, and it could bring in a lot of more complexity in understanding the tables and using the tables as well. And I think so. That's the what we've been thinking about. This is something, as I said, we will try to cover off in the supplemental guide. So maybe then asking if that would be sufficient, or we need to add something in here.
So the task force on initial reaction is asking really to leave it as is, unless someone feels that this is an absolutely fatal issue to getting input on the document. Is that a fair characterization? If anyone objects to that, raise their hand. Okay, nothing. Okay, so I think we're okay with that. Kai Uwe?
Thanks, Tom. I have a comment to the paragraph 9.4, where we have mentioned the independent auditor's report. I see that under the IAASB conventions, footnotes should not use for substantive matters, especially requirements. Since during the Clarity Project, it was noted that some jurisdictions that enshrine the requirements of the ISAs into law would not pick the footnotes. I'm therefore not convinced that using footnotes in this way is an appropriate means of replacing requirements. The matters in the footnotes should be elevated to requirements for the report. That's my first comment. And the second comment relates to paragraph 9.5. Missing from this section is the requirement in paragraph 15 of ISA 705, not permitting piecemeal opinions. Also missing is the requirement for both adverse and disclaimers of opinion from ISA 705, paragraph 27. That requires other modifications to be included. In my view, it is in the public interest that users of the report become aware of all modifications. These are my two comments. Thanks.
Reaction? Brett?
Thanks, Kayuve, for those 2 points. So first of all, just on the footnotes for clarity conventions, we did spend, I guess, the way that we approach this one is to say, we're trying to do something a little bit different here. And for this report to be usable, for it to be as practical as possible for its intended users, being auditors of LCEs, we felt that this was the presentation format that would get us there. So fully appreciate the point that this is not something we would do in the full suite of ISAs, and I wouldn't want this to be a precedent for us bringing footnotes back into the ISAs in this way. But for this standard in this particular place, it was the best option we could come up with. Now, I guess to follow on from your question, the logical thing is, what do you do if you're in one of those jurisdictions where you don't either like or can deal with footnotes because of your legislative drafting conventions? The answer for that, I think, would be there's nothing preventing someone from inserting all these into the report itself. It just makes it harder to read, which is the reason why we didn't do it that way, but there's nothing to stop you from doing that. So we've tried to write them fairly carefully so that that can happen if it needs to. But that would be something that I think a national standard setter or a legislator who was trying to do that exercise, they would need to do that. And that wouldn't be the only thing. I mean, I've had some experience in doing that legislative drafting myself, and there's a fair amount of editing that's needed just to comply with domestic legislative drafting rules. So just your question about the piecemeal opinions, the paragraph you're referring to, the piecemeal part of that is actually single financial statements, elements of financial statements, those kinds of pieces. So consistent with what we said before, that's prohibited under, as in this standard at the moment does not accommodate anything under ISA 800. So that would be, that's the reason why we didn't pick up that comment. Now, as was mentioned before, that's something that we can do within the explanatory memorandum. The last point you had about paragraph 27, I think with this one, we got to the conclusion that this was one of those ones that was kind of on the bubble. Like we weren't quite sure whether to put it in or leave it out, and we've landed where we've landed. The reporting supplement can go into much more detail on this kind of a matter. So we do think that's probably the better place for it.
Okay, Kai, any reactions? Could you live with the task force position for the purposes of the exposure draft?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I have understood what Brett have mentioned relating to my first comment. Brett agreed that this is not a regular case relating to the footnote, so this is a kind of exception. This is what I understand. Okay, Brett, if you have decided it, then it is a extraordinary case, and I have understood that the comment which I have made referring to 9.5, there should be more remarks, explanations, explanatory memorandum. This is what I have taken with me. Thanks.
And so you're comfortable with where we are right now for the purposes of exposure?
Would say so far this is not a fatal flaw.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is task force comfortable with where we landed on that? The board comfortable with where we landed on that? Okay. Any other comments on part 9? Okay, let's go to the appendices and definitions. Any comments? Sachika.
Thank you. Sorry, it's very minor point, but on the glossary of terms, definitions, on the definition of general purpose framework, it's page 6 in my version. There is a small a and b in the first part, and then in the hanging sentence, it uses small 1 and 2. So perhaps they should be consistent. Maybe 1 and 2 in the hanging sentence should be changed to small a and b. Very minor point.
Any reaction?
I think it's correct. It seems like it's the bullets it's referring back to should be A and B and not 1 and 2.
Okay. Good call. Good catch, Ashika. Any other comments on appendices and definitions? By that, I people are comfortable with them. Okay, what's that? Are you
the next one?
Slide?
If we go to the next slide, then we have the conforming amendments to the preface.
Yep. Any comments on the conforming amendments? I see no hands up, Kai, so I'm taking that as support. Okay, we could go on to the next.
Yep.
Due process matters. So I think this is where, in the lead up to a vote on an exposure draft, I ask you to comment on where we are from a due process standpoint.
Thank you. I'll do that now. In the task force view, the significant matters it has identified as a result of its deliberations since the beginning of this project and its considerations thereon have been reflected in the agenda material presented to the IAASB at its meetings. In the task force view, there are no significant matters it has discussed in this project that have not been brought to the IAASB's attention. And the task force does not believe the field testing of a proposal or holding a public forum or roundtable or issuing a consultation paper would warrant given the input from stakeholders over the course of this project as a whole.
Thank you. It's not in my notes, but Veli, is it appropriate that I ask you for an assessment of the due process or any other matters related to due process before we get to a vote?
No, Tom, for purposes of an exposure draft, the due process matters that Kai has dealt with is sufficient.
Okay, thanks for setting me straight on the parliamentary rules. I'm learning. Okay, so we're going to vote. I asked for the vote, but I'm going to remind people we're actually going to do this in two parts. One is on the draft exposure draft, and then the conforming amendments. Now,
if you go to the next slide, you have them listed out.
Right. Okay. Agenda paper 2A updated and with a couple of notes we made for the on the public record today, with supplement to agenda paper 2, agenda item 2D. We are voting on this as an exposure draft. We deal with the length of the exposure period after we vote, as you know, but we talked 180 days, so that's a separate discussion after this. But I just want to get confirmed with people that you understand what we are voting for and whether you have any comments on the approach. I see no hands raised. So I take it that you're comfortable with voting on the final draft standard as an exposure draft as listed here as the first go. Is that fair? Okay. We're going to ask how much, we're going to do it in this order. And for those who dissent or abstain, we'll have an opportunity to comment on it afterwards as well. Who wishes to dissent to the issuance of the exposure draft as articulated to the board today? By show of hands. I see.
Sorry, Thomas, dissent and no, is that what you're asking?
No vote. No for the issuance. Anyone want to say no to the issuance of the exposure draft? I have no hands raised for that, so there are no votes. Abstentions. So I have 2 abstentions, Imran and Edo. Okay, you could lower your hands. I'll give you an opportunity afterwards to comment on your abstentions. Edo, okay, thank you. Who votes in favor of the release of the exposure draft? I'll do my hand manually, so I can't raise my hand. So let the record state that we have 16 votes in favor. That would be all board members in attendance, minus Edo and Imran, who abstained, for the exposure draft on the final draft standard. This is part 1. Okay, great. Lower your hands. We'll do the same thing on the conforming amendments. Any no votes for that? Let the record say there were no votes. Any abstentions on conforming amendments? No abstentions. And for the record, who votes in favor of the conforming amendments? Not surprisingly, we have a full unanimity, 18 votes in favor of the conforming amendments. Okay. Kai, could I ask you to comment on the proposed, I think we've talked about this in advance, of the proposed, Wendy, you have your hand up. Is it just still out of enthusiasm for the yes vote? Kai, do you want to talk about the proposed exposure period?
Yes, we have that on the next slide here. Or not this.
There he is.
There he is.
I'm waiting for him.
You were asking for the Viking to be there. So we'll have to bring him back.
You indulge me.
So, I'll come back to some of that afterwards, but I think I can just update you on what you can expect from here. So if you go to the next slide, or no, just wait. I think here we have what should be next. You will receive the draft explanatory memorandum on July 6th, and that's the same time, the deadline for the comments of the supplements that you've already received. So if you have additional comments on the supplement of the authority reporting, the deadline is on July 6th. And then the deadline for the comments on EM is on July 14th. The week of July 19th, that's when we will publish the exposure draft and the explanatory memorandum. And we will have in Q4 of 2021 and Q1 in 2022, we will do the outreach as we briefly discussed earlier. And then, as you see the last point here on the comment period, as we discussed earlier, we have 180 days comment period, or maybe a little bit more, depending on when it goes out in July. So that's where you should go next.
So to remind me, I think we were talking about a January 31st,
yes.
2022 end date to the comment period. So
correct.
As long as it takes, you'll get as many days as it takes up to that, which we think is at least 180 days minimum. Are people comfortable with that? I think this was agreed previously. Okay, great job. We'll come back to Fernando.
Thanks, Tom. Just one question, Kai. I think Bev mentioned that the intention is to have documents in French and Spanish. Just wondering if the week of July 19th, we will have those documents as well. And I'm just trying to plan ahead on local communications and other stuff. Or if there's going to be a delay in translation, that's fine. I just would like to have some sense of dates.
There'll be a slight delay. Probably the standard we can have ready at that time. But obviously the explanatory memorandum, we were up against a really tight timeline, and by the time we've turned it to the board, so we may need a little bit of time for that. But I'm just waiting. We're coordinating with the translators at the moment, Fernando. I'll come back to you as soon as we have more definite dates.
Thank you. Important point, Fernando. And thank you, Bev, for the clarification. Okay. So before we get back to the Viking at the top of the mountain, I just wanted to call on Jim Dowkin for any observations on the ED.
Thanks, Tom. I think I'm very impressed that the board was able to put this together, and the level of improvements with each iteration was under the tight time frame was quite something. The CAG has been supportive of the LCE concept, and I think it is good that we have something out for public exposure that can be commented on. And so I think that the CAG will be very supportive of where the board has landed on this. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. One minor thing before I get to Karen. Did we need, Kai, any clarity around proposed effective date of the standard? Yesterday, I think there's been some talk about 24 months from it, or is this something that you want to defer to a later date?
I think the intention of the standard, depending on the comments coming back, is that we will have an effective date of the standard somewhere between 18 and 24 months, depending on where we're at. So that's our thinking of that. Willie, you want to come in?
Yeah, I think that's right. We will address that in the explanatory memorandum, as we always do. And we will also ask our stakeholders a specific question on that. So very much difficult at this point to sort of gauge, because it will be very much dependent on what we hear back from our stakeholders. But I do think we can at least indicate that from an implementation period point of view, we will probably be thinking of an implementation period of around 18 to 24 months, but we will obviously invite comments on that as well.
Okay, people are comfortable with that. Okay, Karen, on behalf of the IOB, I would ask you to have any observations on our work on LCEs to this point.
Thanks very much, Tom. I apologize that I'm dropping in here at the very end, but I don't believe I heard what the reasons for the two dissenting views are. And I think that's very important in the public interest.
Fair reminder for me. I was going to go back to that after you observed, but I was going to give Imran and Ido an opportunity to comment as well. But maybe before you comment on the public interest, we'd give them an opportunity. So my apologies, Ido and Imran, for the sequencing. But Imran, I'll go to you first and then to Ido. I think we probably heard some of it on the public record already, but it's important to you have an opportunity to state your abstentions. Remember, they weren't a no vote, they were abstentions.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for reminding me that there were abstentions. So I have a few public interest remarks to make, really just from the perspective of someone who works full-time at a regulator and is a full-time standard setter, recognizing that I just abstained on this vote. But I guess the correct starting point is really to congratulate our board on a very successful vote today. This project has a lot of interest in some parts of the marketplace, and it is likely to be very warmly and widely welcomed. And I believe that over time, this is going to become an essential part of what the IAASB does. So congratulations on that. And a special word of congratulations to our friend Kai Morton. If we were in New York, we would be taking Instagram pictures or TikTok movies now. His task force and all the staff who have supported this project, certainly they've excelled. And we go back all the way to the Paris conference. This project has had many people contribute to it, and all of them should be very proud today. My own participation started 5.5 years ago. And at the time I mentioned that the IAASB faces many risks if it did something, but it also faced risks if it did nothing. And what was necessary was for us to strike the right balance between these things. On the one hand, we didn't want to erode the faith in the IAASB's own existing standards. We didn't want the board's reputation to suffer. We didn't want other initiatives around audit quality to suffer. But at the same time, we wanted to meet the audit needs for the LCE marketplace. And there was always going to be a very tall order to try to square that. More so because we tried to do this on an accelerated basis. And one of the consequences, I think, of the speed that we did this with was the agility that the board displayed, but that on a few matters, we simply didn't have enough time to close the gap successfully. And we may have left one or two people behind in the process. And I'm unfortunately that person, one of those two people today. Let me emphasize, though, for the record, that my vote casts no doubt at all on the quality of the requirements or the application material in the 9 parts and the appendices. I am really supportive that if it is properly implemented, it will deliver a reasonable assurance opinion that is really appropriate for the circumstances of an LCE. And I think that's an important message to clarify as a public member. But we said in the project proposal that this project serves the public interest by promoting consistent practice and behaviors. And that's a direct quote from the project proposal. We sought to promote consistent practice and behaviors. How much did we seek to do it? Well, we used the word consistency 9 times in the project proposal. But as I've said in my earlier remarks today, have we achieved that consistency as it relates, importantly, to the question of scope and authority of the standard? I think that, I pause here because I think that these procedures in the work effort is only ever appropriate if it is applied to the right entity. And that slice of the market, that right entity, which we describe as the authority of the scope, is where my concerns have been and where they remain today. If there is no regulatory consistency, which is my concern, and there's conflict between a regulator and those that we regulate, and if there's doubt and second guessing, then I fear that we as a board may have missed an opportunity. I think it's important, if we have all concluded that the requirements are appropriate, that we have to be able to answer appropriate for what. And it is here where, on my reading of the standard, I don't think we have yet reached a sufficiently clear conclusion. When we discuss the qualitative characteristics, we stacked words together, such as complexity or higher degree. But in practice, these words become an area of extreme judgment. And when you combine this judgment with auditor bias, with auditor knowledge and auditor experience, market dynamics, and importantly, commercial considerations that are going to play a part, together with inducements, the judgment in this area has the risk of going out of control. And it is this judgment that I don't support and hence abstain today. The potential of this language, the interpretation of this language really has a potential to increase inconsistencies among partners in the same firm, among the firms in a network, among regulators and practitioners, and from one jurisdiction to another. When the public receives such a report, I think they need to know what the report means, and they need to know whether it's an appropriate application of the standard. And if they have to read 15 paragraphs that feature many areas of judgment without arriving at a clear answer, I believe that that kind of practice will continue to erode, could continue to erode trust, and particularly change their views about the expectation gap of the audit product. I'm mindful that some revisions were made this week, and those revisions mainly address structure. And even with the engagement partner stand back, I cannot see how the public will get the answer that they're looking for here. What is the risk that we face as a board? Inconsistent application is the risk. Which entities are in or out is the risk. Arbitrage between standards and the firms is also the risk. Opinion shopping is the risk. But the real public interest risk here is that if the standard is applied in the incorrect circumstances by a firm or partner whose intentions are not good, then we may have a failed audit engagement. And that's the public interest risk that I'm highlighting. However, there is a bright side. The exposure process, which starts today, will give us the opportunity to hear from a broad range of stakeholders about this and possibly make the improvements post-exposure, which address the public interest needs that I've noted today. I won't be on the board then when the board considers the final standard. I won't be on the board when the board analyzes those comments. So I'll have to be outside the board and write to you as an ordinary respondent and member of the public. But I hope then you'll read my comments twice, not once, and that we'll be able to appropriately respond in the final standard. Tom, thank you for the opportunity to make these comments in the public interest.
Thank you, Imran, and apologies for the sequencing. Edo.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Imran, as well, as I could not have put it better as he did in respect of the concerns around the qualitative characteristics that the firms and the practitioners need to apply. So I won't repeat that. And I've mentioned this previously, that the requirements in this standard continue to be accompanied by rather limited EEM or application material. And I've yet to fully reconcile in my mind how reducing that, and mind you, this application material was imported in the context of the full standards, that supports, and this was one of the objectives of the project proposal, consistent, effective and high quality audits for LCEs. I appreciate that we know the full ISAs, but do all the practitioners that are getting hold of this standard and are going to apply it in practice? And there is, of course, and this is vetted on the concern that we've made a tangible effort to reducing the length of the standards. As Imran, I'm comfortable with the requirements that have been put into the standards. They are a faithful representation of what's in the full ISAs. I'm just wondering whether all of us who are knowledgeable of the full standards don't bring that level of knowledge to this, and to what extent the consistent application leading in consistent, effective and high quality audits would be safeguarded. So if I weigh those qualitative characteristics with this next comment all together, and particularly taking account of paragraph 10 of the due process, I cannot approve the current draft ISA for LCE as an exposure draft. Recognizing that I'm not and would not be comfortable with this as a final standard as currently drafted. However, I also entirely recognize that we need to ask for feedback on this. So otherwise we would just be at a standstill. And that's the reason for not dissenting but abstaining, because I do think it is important that we ask for comments on where we are now, and then get this process or get this standard towards the next level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edo and Imran, for your thoughtful perspectives. Karen, now thank you for the reminder about sequencing, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and IAASB members. And very thankful to hear the explanations for the 2 members who have abstained from the vote. And I took comfort in the fact that both of you identified that this is an exposure draft for comment, and that there will be opportunities for comment to come in before the standard is finalized. I think the PIOB has found the meetings last week and this week very well handled and managed, and that everyone has had an opportunity to make the points that they have brought forward, and that we at the PIOB share the key point at the end that it is very important which entities this standard will be applied to, and the issue of consistency. So thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you. Okay, can I ask everyone but the LCE task force and the staff that have worked on this project to turn their videos off? Okay, I just wanted to do this to highlight and to put you in the spotlight for this truly extraordinary Herculean effort, and really to have done it all during the pandemic, really, from start to finish. Just extraordinary work. And I think even for those who had any concerns, how responsive you were and diligent with your work. It's just been incredible throughout it. Kai, I don't know, this is what you were bargaining for when you were willing to step to the plate, but I think the Viking has put on extra muscle during his climb up that big mountain. I also wanted to mention, not on the call, or at least not appearing, is Chris Arnold and Brendan Murtagh, who have been involved so closely with this project. I wanted to reference the reference group who were so instrumental to this. And more than anything else, you know, the task force done spectacular work to get this point, but Bev, Nikki, Amy, it wouldn't have gotten there here without you, and particularly Bev, who I think has slept about 3 hours a day for the last 12 months to get this project done. So much so that she's now thinking about changing her initials to LCE of her name. But really extraordinary efforts on our behalf. And so thank you. I want to thank the board for being so constructive, even those who had comments for being so detailed throughout. So really extraordinary efforts by the whole team in support of this. Everyone could turn the cameras back on, but thank you so much for this. And I should mention Roger too, who's sort of the godfather of the LCE project, because LCE used to be a bigger thing, complexity, and you know, your support on CUSP and also on LCE is extraordinary too. So thank you all. Kai, I'll let you comment a little bit, but congratulations to you all. This is a big milestone for the board, and we look forward. The fun really starts now, because we know we're not at the finish line, and that for this project, the comments and stakeholder input, as Imran and Ado say, are so important to get this standard right.
Thank you, Tom. I think that is very true. It's almost, it's not that the work stops, it just changes focus in a way. So it is very important, as you all pointed out, to get the input throughout the ED. And I do think we will get that, but also we need to do some directed outreach to get from some stakeholders that we may not necessarily hear from ordinarily. I would also like to thank a few people that have been part of this process. I think Arnold Schilder had continued to hear from the Nordic Federation for a number of years. The push for to do something in relation to audits of LCEs. Eventually we got on board, and I think that's thanks to some of my colleagues in the Nordic Federation that continued to push, and then it was took on by Chuck Landis, chaired the unofficial working group, and then being taken over by Ron Salomi, heading that up for a while. And then, as you said, thanks to the working group, before we turned into a task force, thanks to all the members of the task force, I think we have never met officially as a task force. So hopefully there will be a time that we can physically meet again. I think as Tom alluded to, doing this during a pandemic and only having virtual meetings is putting some additional stress and difficulties on us. But I think we managed, based on the feedback from the board, we managed to get through. And also thanks to the reference group providing input throughout the process. And I have not forgotten all the staff being involved. I think as Tom mentioned, there has been a number of people being involved in this throughout. But I will just thank Brett for stepping in at the 12th hour to deal with our reporting struggles. Thank you very much for all your help on that, and also being able to record a video that explained it. I think that was very helpful and essential in order to explaining what we are thinking. Amy for coming in as a new staff and jumping into the pool at the very deepest end at the first time. And I think thank you very much for all the efforts. Willie also for his support, and Tom for the continued support for the project and help throughout. and I've not forgotten the most important project or person to this project that has been there throughout more or less the whole period in the IAASB era of this. I think since we were back at some of the even meetings before we had officially became a working group. Brett, no, not Brett, I'm having difficulties talking now. Beverly, I think, as you said, I think we've probably spoken more on Zoom and Teams than that sometimes I've done with my family and my wife. So thank you very much for all your support and all your help and all the hours put in to this project. I can hardly imagine all that's been done. So without you, this has never been possible to do. So a big thanks from the whole LCE community. And I think now it's up to people actually responding to the ED. I think when the first time when this project came to the board, it was on a session in Amsterdam. I think I looked back at the slides from that session, and I think it ended with let's keep an open mind and let's start a global conversation. I think looking at the image we had earlier with the Viking climbing the mountain, if you are climbing a mountain or going up hills, sometimes you think you see the top. Only when you get there are multiple tops going further and further. So when you think you're there, there is actually way more that needs to be done. So I think that's our experience from this as well. We hope we eventually got to the top, but there were times where we thought soon we must be there. So just thanks thanks all to the board for keeping an open mind, and that we're actually together as a board managed to get this project through. It's not only a task force or a task force chair or staff that brings it to this is something we do together as a board. We agreed on the project proposal, and now we executed on that project proposal, and together as a board, we got this through. So thank you everyone for being involved, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from people now on the ED. So back to you, Tom.
Thank you for those remarks, Kai. And again, thank you to all you do and the inclusiveness of the process that you've run as part of this, that it really was a board and team effort. But I know the hours have been extraordinary and irregular, to say the least, for you in recent times. So thank you. The hard work clearly is to come, and we know we are not at the finish line. And what we need to do as a board is use our collective energies to get as much input into this process, and that's going to take everyone's efforts that on this call right now, whether it's board members, staff, or TAs. So we welcome your input and certainly want you to be part of this outreach process. So let us bring what has been effectively these almost 10 days of meetings to a close. Right now, it's been a long one, but a very productive one. Before I do bring the meeting to close, I did want to say Karen gave some general remarks, but if you had anything, observations on behalf of the PIOB, I certainly would welcome them, and then same for Jim.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I have no additional comments. I believe Mike Hageman gave his comments at the end of his observation last week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. And Jim?
I really have no additional comments, but I know I look forward to sharing with the CAG, LCE, and what's been done, and I'm very interested in their feedback because I've been very vocal on this particular standard. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. And it could be easy to forget. It could be lost in the process of how much progress we made on fraud and 600 last week as well. And I think on fraud, what I'm most pleased with is how much we've injected some of the public interest considerations into the project. as it's been going on, and we're getting to a point that we're getting to a project proposal that has filtered, going down that funnel as Lynn had described at the outset. And also on 600, we seem to be making good progress on a lot of the key issues that we're reasonably confident that we will produce a standard on time in December. So it's been a really productive week, and we had a lot of good debate at those sessions. Because it's been so productive the last 10 days or so, I know you're dying for minutes of these meetings, and they will be distributed to the board shortly and posted for approval at our September 2021 meetings. We do have a number of meetings coming up in Q3. We have video conferences planned for July 20th to 21st. And of course, our board meeting from the 13th to the 17th of September. And that will be virtual still. We're deliberating what to do about December still, whether it will be virtual in person or some form of hybrid. I appreciated all your responsiveness on our survey. It's given us some food for thought. It probably indicates that it's probably too soon to decide, considering the rapid changes that we're seeing in the environment right now, but we are considering the survey results and hope to have something back on December shortly. My guess, though, is there'll be no firm decision in the next month or so. That, again, it's a fluid environment. On the next IAASB CAG meeting also will be virtual on September 8th to 9th. And we'll be in contact with task force and work group chairs who may need to attend. For the video conferences, we're doing our best to get the papers out even earlier than the 7 to 10 day minimum. And we expect the posting to begin for our September meeting on August 23rd and completed by August 27th. So thank you all. It's really important, again, use your social media and LinkedIn and all the others to promote the news of this passage and of the ED and to attract interest in the comment period. We will only be better for the comments of our external stakeholders on this topic. I thank you. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add before we close. I see no comments. I would, Billy?
Sorry, Tom, I just wanted to confirm because we did get one or two comments, sorry, not comments, queries in the lead up to this meeting. So just a reminder for the board that we'll have the two sessions on July 20 and 21. Remember, on July 20, we will have two sessions, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, to accommodate audit evidence in the morning, where Sue is the chair of that task force, and in the afternoon to accommodate Lynn on the fraud project. And then on the next day, we'll only have an afternoon session where we will deal with the PI topic. And that is to accommodate the availability of our ethics board colleagues. We did indicate in the agenda that was distributed on May 19th that we will just do a final confirmation of the session on July 21, whether that will indeed be a 2-hour session from 4 to 6. It might be extended, but we have a catch up with our ethics colleagues next week, so we will give you the final date for that. And then just to clarify, because that's what we had the query on, remember the board calls that were scheduled for August 3 and 4 have been cancelled, so we will not have any board calls in August. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Billy. Any other questions or comments? Okay, with that, I think you've earned at least some rest from your IAASB work. I'm sure you have a lot of work for your other jobs to face now, but we appreciate all your efforts on behalf of the board and your great participation at this meeting. And thank you all And I look forward to speak to you shortly. Great meeting, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.